There is a very specific kind of magic trick where the magician asks you to name the card and you name it, and he says, "No, no, not that one," and somehow walks away having never actually answered the question. It requires a lot of confidence. It requires a certain theatrical skill. And it works right up until the moment someone in the audience notices that they still don't know where the card went. Donald Trump gave an interview on Friday. It was raining, a lot. And at no point in 45 minutes did the sitting president of the United States successfully answer the question, is this a war? Now, before we get into the substance, and there is substance here, real substance, the kind that matters, I want to say something about the format of this interview because it is unusual. Kristen Welker flew to Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin. She sat in a barn. It was storming. The roof was metal. At multiple points, the rain made it physically impossible to hear either of them. And the president of a country actively conducting a naval blockade took the opportunity to describe that conflict as, quote, a military exercise. Because, and I'm quoting directly here, people would rather have it called that. I want to sit with that sentence for just a moment. A military exercise. People would rather. The military is exercising. In Iran, against Iran, it's exercise. Cardio, they're all getting their steps in.
They've been largely decapitated, and I call it a military exercise because people would rather have it called that. It's not a big war for...
So, Kristen Welker raises the fact that the United States has a naval blockade in place around Iran. A blockade, under international law, is an act of war. She asks him politely whether the blockade means they are at war. His answer is, I don't define it at all. I don't think about it. I just do what I have to do. Now I want to be fair here, because there is actually an honest and coherent position buried somewhere in that answer. The honest version goes, we are conducting sustained military operations against a sovereign state. We don't want to use the word war because it has certain domestic political implications, and the legal definitions are frankly complicated. That would be defensible. What he actually said was, I do not think about it, which is, that's the president of the country, not thinking about whether they're at war, doing what he has to do. He is very busy not thinking about it. He is doing things constantly without thinking. Some might call that a management philosophy. Others might call it something else.
There is a naval blockade in place,
Yeah.
which technically is an act of war under international law. So is this a war as long as there's a naval blockade in place?
Well, we have a blockade. It's been extremely effective, and the reason we have it is they try to blockade, and now we blockaded them. And as you know, they're losing $400 to $500 million a day. It's not sustainable for them. They have an economy that's shot in addition to everything else. Their leaders are gone. Their generals are gone. Their first tier and second tier are gone. Much of their third tier is gone. But they put up a blockade, and so we blockaded them, and we have the ultimate blockade. I don't consider that a war, but if you want to define it as such, I guess you can.
Well, how do you define it?
I don't define it at all. I don't think about it. I just do what I have to do.
This is the part of the interview that matters most, and the part that got the least attention. Because the walkout at the end was more dramatic. Trump says the nuclear site is obliterated. 3 mountains fell in. Buried. They can't get it. And I want to take that claim seriously, because the underlying military action, B-2 bombers in June 2025 against Iran's enrichment facilities, that did happen, and it did cause significant damage. Natanz, the main enrichment plant, was assessed at around 75% destroyed. The Natanz Research and Development Facility, 95%. These are real numbers. This is not nothing.
Front end.
Well, depending on when you say immediately, look, it is buried under mountains because our B-2s were incredible. The pilots of our B-2s were unbelievable. And it's buried. They can't get it. The only 2 countries that could take it, that have the equipment to take, you have to understand, 3 mountains have fallen in on them, right? So you understand that, because the fake news was going around saying, oh, maybe they didn't hit their target. 1 o'clock in the morning, pitch black, no moon, no nothing, and every one of those bombs went right down those chutes and blew up.
But here is the part of the interview that requires some context. The Congressional Research Service, in a report from April 2026, estimated that Iran still holds 440.9 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%. To be precise about what 60% means, weapons grade is 90%. The gap between 60 and 90 is, technically, a few weeks with the right centrifuges. And according to the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation, that 440-kilogram stockpile, if further enriched, is enough material for approximately 10 nuclear weapons. 10. The IAEA withdrew its inspectors in June 2025 and has not been able to verify conditions on the ground since. So when the president says the nuclear threat is buried and gone, the more accurate description is it's damaged, partially inaccessible, and unverified by anyone, which is a very different sentence from 3 mountains fell in on them. He said this on television during a recorded interview.
You know, if you think we beat Venezuela, we lost nobody. We took over the whole country. We lost nobody. We have a great relationship, by the way, with Venezuela. Venezuela is doing very well, but we lost nobody.
We lost nobody in Venezuela. And I understand why no one pushed back hard in the moment, because Welker was managing rain, audio issues, a president who was visibly getting irritated, and about 14 other major topics. That's a hard interview to conduct. But for the record, according to available records on the 2026 U.S. intervention in Venezuela, 7 U.S. soldiers were injured in the operation. On the Venezuelan and Cuban side, the casualty estimates run from 23 to 47 military personnel killed, plus 32 Cuban security personnel, plus 2 civilians. So, we lost nobody is, at minimum, a very generous definition of nobody, and at maximum, simply not accurate. What is accurate is that the operation was fast, that Maduro was captured, and that casualties were dramatically lower than historical precedents for operations of that scale. That version of events would have been defensible and impressive. The nobody version just doesn't survive contact with a 5-second search. I want to spend a moment on the journalism here, because I think Kristen Welker gets a raw deal in how this interview has been covered. She is conducting this interview in a metal barn in a rainstorm with a subject who talks at great length without quite landing anywhere, who deflects by changing the subject to Vietnam, roughly 17 times, and who eventually walks out. And there is a type of media criticism that says a tougher interviewer would have pinned him down more. Maybe. But I think that criticism underestimates the structural problem, which is pinning down a subject who is committed to never accepting the framing of the question is almost impossible in a live format. You can re-ask, you can note the non-answer, but you cannot actually force someone to answer. The JCPOA exchange is a perfect example. She asks a genuinely important question. You promised a better deal when you ripped up the nuclear agreement. Why didn't you make one? His response is to compare the timeline to Vietnam, which is a non-answer dressed up as historical perspective. And the interview has to move on because there are 12 more topics, and it is raining, and the president is visibly tiring of the exercise.
But, Mr. President, I'm curious because when you were campaigning, you said you would rip up the Iran nuclear deal, but negotiate a better deal. Why didn't you negotiate a better deal at the time? Because after it was ripped up, there weren't guardrails, and they escalated their production of enriched uranium.
Excuse me. It takes years to do these things. These people have been fighting for 47 years. They've been killing Americans. They've been taking off their legs and their arm, and their faces have been hurt so badly and so horribly. I'm moving very fast. I'm into 3 months. You know, Vietnam lasted 19 years. I'm into my 3rd month.
Which, of course, is the exercise. The interview as a format is structurally disadvantaged against a subject who views answering questions as optional. And here is the strange thing about this interview. Buried inside the deflections and the Vietnam comparisons and the I don't think about it, there are moments where he actually tells you something real.
Is this younger Khomeini any better for the United States than his father was?
Younger, I think more rational, injured. He's pretty badly injured. So there's a certain bravery there. A lot of people, if they were injured that badly, they wouldn't be talking about, you know, how we doing with the United States. They'd have other things on their mind. So there's a certain bravery there. But he is very seriously injured, yeah.
What is the status of talks exactly in this moment? How close are you to making a deal? Are we talking about days, weeks, months, Mr. President?
I think we're very close. We have a couple of points. They don't even seem like big points. They've conceded the fact that they will not have nuclear weapons. we had a clause in there that we will not develop nuclear weapons, and everybody was very happy with it except me. And I said, well, what happens if they not develop, but they go out and purchase, they acquire? I want to put the word, if they buy or purchase or acquire, you've got to have that in there too, because that's not developing. So they don't have the right to develop or purchase, acquire, or buy.
Have they pushed back against that? Is that one of the sticking points?
A little bit, and then they didn't.
Okay. You have been saying for months, Mr. President, that Iran is begging to make a deal.
True.
If they are so desperate to make a deal, why haven't they made a deal with you yet?
Because it's a very hard thing for them. They've had great independence. They've dealt with very weak and ineffective leadership on behalf of the United States and other countries, frankly, that allowed them to get away with murder. And I think they can't believe they're in the situation where they've been virtually decapitated.
But if they're so desperate, Mr. President, why haven't they said yes to the terms you're proposing?
Strong, they're proud. There are things they never thought they'd be doing that they're going to have to do. They've got no choice.
The section on the son of the supreme leader is one of them. He says the new Iranian leadership is different, more rational, seriously injured, that they pay homage to the younger Khamenei, and that negotiations are ongoing through a third set of interlocutors, after the first two tiers were eliminated. That is not nothing. That is a specific and coherent description of a political situation. And the section where he talks about Iranian pride, they've had great independence. They never thought they'd be doing this. They've got no choice. That is actually a reasonably accurate description of why these negotiations are difficult. Iran is not negotiating from a position of desperation. Iran is negotiating from a position of humiliation, which is harder to manage than desperation. Desperate countries take deals quickly. Humiliated countries negotiate slowly because the domestic audience is watching. He understands that. He said it out loud. It is genuinely interesting. The analysis is sound. The framing is coherent. And it got completely buried under the noise of everything else. The walkout has been covered as the dramatic ending to a dramatic interview. And it is dramatic. But I think the drama obscures what it actually is, which is a signal, a consistent and deliberate one. The interview ends on California vote counting.
All I have to do is look. All I have to do is look.
That's not evidence.
And I listen. And I listen to people. And let's see what happens.
But, sir, that's not evidence.
Do you think it's appropriate?
That's how they count the votes in California.
Do you think it's appropriate that they have an election and 5 days later they're nowhere close to picking a winner?
State and local officials acknowledge they are slow. They're urging.
No, they're crooked.
They're urging the votes to be counted quickly. That's how they vote in California.
They're crooked, just like you're crooked. Your press is crooked, and Meet the Press is crooked.
To be fair, I'm not crooked, but let's
Really?
Let's
Well,
continue.
you play right into their hands.
Let's continue.
You're either crooked or you're stupid. You play right into their hands with this rap. You know that these elections are rigged. Your network knows that they're rigged. You know that I won an election in a landslide, and I got 94% bad press.
But, Mr. President,
you know why I got that? Because you have no
evidence.
credibility.
But you've never presented evidence that it was rigged. Let's keep talking about. I want to talk about Todd
You
Blanche.
have more evidence. There's more evidence than ever presented.
Let's talk
Your
about
elections in this country. We're like a third world country.
But, sir,
your elections are crooked, and you're crooked, and Meet the Press is crooked, and so is ABC and CBS and CNN.
But, Mr. President,
you're one-sided crooked networks. All right, let's call it quits because I've had enough. Thank you, darling. Have a good time.
Mr. President, let's please. I traveled all the way to Wisconsin.
She asks for evidence. He says he doesn't need evidence. He just looks and listens. She says that is not evidence. He says she is either crooked or stupid, calls the network dishonest, and walks out. The surface reading is, he lost his temper. The more interesting reading is, this is what happens every time when a factual claim runs out of road. The conversation cannot go further down the factual path, so the path itself is discredited. The journalist is made untrustworthy, the network is made corrupt, and the exit is reframed as principled. It worked on Vietnam. It worked on Venezuela. It did not quite work on California, which is why the path had to end there. He agreed the following day to do another interview, which is the correct move. The relationship continues. The pattern continues. That is what the walkout was. 100 days in, and the President of the United States is conducting a naval blockade, negotiating with unnamed intermediaries for access to nuclear material buried under 3 mountains. His description, and sitting in a barn in Wisconsin in the rain, explaining that Vietnam lasted 19 years and this has only been 3 months. He is not wrong about the 3 months. He is correct that 3 months is not 19 years. But the interesting question, as I record this, is not whether the analogy holds. It's whether the ending of that particular comparison is supposed to be reassuring. Vietnam did end, eventually. After 19 years and approximately 58,000 American dead and 2 million Vietnamese dead, and a national reckoning that lasted a generation. So, yes, 3 months is not 19 years. That is technically accurate. That is one way to think about it. I am Marcus Fenn. This is Borderlines, analysis from the edge. If this kind of analysis is worth having, subscribe. The most revealing interviews, it turns out, happen in the rain.